fellow cyborgs. Today I'm going to talk to you about romance novels. So one thing you may not know about my reading tastes, because I did not in fact read any, I don't think, in the year of 2015, which was my first full year on BookTube, is that I greatly enjoy genre romance novels. I first learned about this desire to read these sorts of books and the love of reading these sorts of books from the Vaginal Fantasy Book Club, which is an online book club. There is a Goodreads group, and there are also monthly live Google Hangouts between the four hosts, which are Felicia Day, Veronica Belmont, Kyla Catesby, and Bonnie Burton. And they define genre romance as romance novels that have some sort of twist to them. So either it's historical or paranormal or steampunk or sci-fi, but it's never going to be, it's 2013 and Candy is on the run and she runs into Jack, a race car driver from Indianapolis. No, that's not the sort of thing that runs our jam. The main goal of the Vaginal Fantasy Book Club is to find good books that happen to have romance or sex in them, but that would be good books without the romance or sex. They're not always successful, but this is what their aim is to show that romance and sex can be in books, can be in good books, and have it not just be a waste of time and trash. I found one of my favorite trilogies of all time through Vaginal Fantasy, which was Phaedra's trilogy, starting with Kushil's Dart by Jacqueline Carey. This is technically a high fantasy. You would find it in the fantasy section, but as it follows the doings of a courtesan, there be sexy times in there, and it's just a wonderful book series regardless of the sex that you get to read about. But apart from Vaginal Fantasy, which I highly recommend, go to Smart Bitches Trashy Books, which is a book blog online all about romance novels, and it's written by women who love romance novels. They have so many book reviews, and you can filter through the book reviews by the rating that the book was given. Some of the F rating books have the funniest book reviews on this blog. It's hysterical. They're a really great resource if you don't want to have to watch hours and hours and hours of vaginal fantasy or, go back through thousands and thousands of forum posts. Smart Bitches is kind of a cleaner layout for you, and you get a bunch of different explorations into the genre. Check out smartbitchestrashybooks.com. I will link it down below, as I will everything with vaginal fantasy. A perfect segue into the books I'm going to recommend for you today. The first one I recommend is called Beyond Heaving Bosoms, The Smart Bitch's Guide to Romance Novels by Sarah Wendell and Candy Tan. And this is the book that a couple of the blogists on Smart Bitches Trashy Books wrote, and it's a primer about romance novels. It talks about some romance novel trends in the past, some that are happening now, and there are even some sexy times writings at the very end, so you can get a sneak peek without having to buy a second book to see if, reading about sexy times is going to make you super uncomfortable or if you're going to be totally fine with it. I loved this so much. I need to reread it. I haven't read it in years, but it was a lovely little book that celebrated a genre and an aspect of the human experience that I was a little bashful to be perusing. Now let's get into some of the romance novels that I personally adore. First two are a couple that I recently read. You'll have heard about them in my winter reading wrap-up, and they are both by the author Grace Draven. The first one is called Radiance. This is a second world fantasy novel. Premise is that there are these two races, and there's this lowly prince, he's like not ever going to be king, and then this noble woman, and they need to get married to solidify a trade agreement. The book starts off with both of them just frankly admitting to the other that they think the other one is just really ugly. And just happily admitting that and just laughing about it. And then slowly over time, they learn to become attracted to one another and love each other. And then there's also a bit of court politics. This is a very short one. This was a lovely one for me to get back into romance genre because I didn't have to wait a ton of time for some cute flirtations to happen. Depending upon the romance author that you may get immediate sexy times, or you may get sexy times that only happens once in the epilogue. It really varies depending upon the author's taste. And once you figure out what your taste is, then you can figure out which of those books styles you prefer. So Radiance is a really nice give and take between those two spectrum points because the cuteness starts out super quick, but you do have a build up for the actual sex scenes, which I quite enjoy. Second book by Grace Draven that I recently read is called Master of Crows. And funnily enough, this is the book that made me buy a Kindle because I realized that there in the future would be some books that I wanted to read that were good books that were only available on ebook. So that's why I asked for a Kindle for my 22nd birthday or something. And it's taken me this long to get around to it. So like 3 years, but I finally did. And it was so good. The main character, Silhara, he's a sorcerer, but he's exiled from like the sorcerer club, you know, so he's like a rogue sorcerer, and he is being tormented by this god of chaos, and he needs help from the magical sorcerer club, the conclave, to see if he can defeat this. So he needs like a scribe, someone to go through, find magic spells for him. And in walks the main girl character. Can't remember her name, but that's all right. So they start out with a really hatey relationship. So it goes from I hate you to I love you. It's a little problematic at the beginning because Silhara puts, her name starts with an M. I'm going to call her Matilda. That's not her name. But Silhara puts Matilda through some like questionable tests to try to coax magic out of her. And he feels bad at the time, but it's a little, but I really thought that the tenderness that they show eventually in the end of the book really makes up for that rough start. I really, really enjoyed this. This one's quite a bit longer than Radiance, but still not terribly long, you know, maybe 350, 400 pages or something like that. And really, really well written. That's the main thing that I want to tell you about Grace Draven. This is a quality genre romance writer. You're not writing, it's not fluff around the interactions between the two main characters. It's good writing, great world building, and really interesting characters, side characters included. So I think Grace Draven would be a really good place to start, especially if you have an e-reader. Some of her stuff is harder to get in print, but I recommend those two very, very highly. Next is another one. I found this through Vaginal Fantasy. It is called He, She, It by Marge Piercy. I read this a couple years ago and I really liked it. The premise of this is that it is a romance book between an android and a woman, and the woman happens to be of Jewish descent. So there was a lot of really interesting things I learned about the Jewish culture in this. Oh, it's also set in like a future dystopian post-apocalyptic world, which is another flavor you added on there. And then you have really interesting discussions about what is personhood, what is it to be a human with this android that she develops a relationship with. And it was just also really, really well written and just happened to have sex in it. So I really highly recommend He, She, and It. Next is Soulless and the Parasol Protectorate series in general by Gail Carriger. This you will actually find in the science fiction fantasy section of your bookstore. It is a steampunk novel, so it's alt history London, where instead of electricity happening, everything just developed on steam. So you got cogs and all those fun things. Alexia is the main character, and she is soulless. So this is a world where there are vampires and werewolves and other sorts of magic, and that's just commonplace. And she is an anomaly in that if she touches a paranormal creature, she leeches the paranormalness out of them. So for a time being, a vampire becomes human, a werewolf becomes human, etc. So she's very sassy, very opinionated. She's starts the book out as kind of like a spinster age. She's half Italian, so she's got a more like swarthy sort of like complexion, which in, you know, London, England probably wasn't deemed as like the beauty of the town, unfortunately, as crap as that is. I've heard her described as like a more curvy protagonist, because one of the things that you find a lot, or I've found a lot in the romance genre, is that a lot of the main female protagonists are small, petite women. I am tall and large woman. So, you know, having sort of someone who looks the same as you in this romantic setting is a nice thing when you get to find it. I personally didn't read Alexia as like super curvy, just maybe not a stick figure, but you could definitely interpret it that way. The text doesn't go against that, so that's an extra cool bonus there. Soulless is definitely one of the more proper romance novels, so if you were going to be holding one of these books in your hand on the train and your commute to work, you'd probably be least embarrassed about holding Soulless. It's a lot of fun, really well written, really witty and funny Victorian steampunk. It's very, very good. Next, I have 2 books by Mel Brooke, who also writes steampunk genre romance. And the first one is The Iron Duke. This was a pick for vaginal fantasy, and I really enjoyed it. Post-apocalyptic world that's also steampunk. There's a female cop detective, and she ends up, her brother goes missing, and in order to sail the high seas to try to find her brother who was on a ship, she has to make a bargain with the Iron Duke, who's this big hulking beast of a man with a bad temper, kind of like Mr. Rochester on steroids. He, of course, wants to get into her pants because this is a romance novel, and so she has to sail on the ship with him. I can't remember if he makes her promise that she'll be his sex toy on the ship, or if she just knows it's implied because she'll have no chaperone there. But it's not nearly as controlling as I make it sound. He is one of the more alpha males in some of the books that I'm going to be listing to you. So there's a bit of that overtone, but it's not as problematic as I just made it sound. I really loved the writing style and the world building in this. This book, even though it wasn't my favorite relationship between the 2 main characters, it showed me that Mel Brooke definitely knows how to write the sort of romances that I like to read. And so I read a couple more books in that series, and one I want to talk to you about, which is my favorite of hers, is called Riveted. This follows a cyborg kind of. He was in an accident, and so he has a prosthetic eye and a prosthetic leg, and I think one prosthetic arm, something like that. But he's highly modified with steampunky bits, and then the romantic interest is this young woman who has actually traveled to London, but she's originally from an Icelandic lesbian community, which is really, really interesting. And the reason why I love this so much is that I am a sucker for the Beauty and the Beast sort of play between characters. And in this one, the main dude character, because he has so many body modifications and apparently has been told by other women he's tried to sleep with that he is grotesque, he thinks of himself as a monster and that he's completely unlovable, which of course just makes me want to prove to him that that is not true, because how adorable. Oh goodness. So that's one of the reasons why I really loved this. He's definitely not as alpha male-y as the Iron Duke, which I also like. So I really enjoyed Riveted. It was really, really interesting, and I need to reread it sometime soon. All right, moving on, we have The Bride and the Beast by Theresa Medeiros. And the reason why I have this on the list is because when I was heavily reading these genre romances, or at least having one on the go all the time, I was getting sick and tired, like I mentioned to you before, of all the female protagonists being 5'2" and petite and blonde, and I am none of those things. So I searched to see if I could find some romance novels with more voluptuous or at least tall main characters. Give me some varying body types here. And The Bride and the Beast was one of them. And so in this, our main female protagonist is plus size. She's probably on the low end of plus size, but still it's better than a lot that you're going to get as far as body type variation in romance novels. This also has a Beauty and the Beast sort of aspect, which was just double trouble for me, which is why I bought it. And it also, I think, takes place in Scotland. It's awesome. So I really, really enjoyed this one. This one's more of a guilty pleasure. This one's definitely more of a quintessential romance book rather than Solace or the writings of Mel Brooke, which have a bit more of a literary flavor. It could be just a steampunk novel that happens to have sex in it. The Bride and the Beast is definitely a genre romance. I don't remember it having gratuitous sex scenes, but yeah, the writing was not as on par with Grace Draven, Mel Brooke, and Gail Carriger. And finally, I want to talk to you about Wicked as They Come by Delilah S. Dawson. This is so cute. This is also steampunk because I love steampunk. Steampunk romances, yes, I'm there for it. Wicked as They Come starts out with this nurse in an estate sale finding this locket, and when she goes to sleep wearing the locket, she wakes up in this dreamland and meets Criminy Stain, if I remember. His name is Criminy Stain, I think. He's the owner, proprietor, manager of this traveling circus steampunk train in this second world where there are the Bloods, which are kind of like vampires, but it can be animals as well, and then the Pinkies, which are the humans. And obviously the Bloods and the Pinkies don't go very well, and you go very well together. And then they've got separate societies, or at least districts within these isolated cities, because how the Bloods came to be somehow in this world. It's not the best world. It's kind of post-apocalyptic a little bit. You know, it's not easy. It's not an easy world. It's a bit tough. When she sleeps, she's in this world. And when she wakes up, she's in her regular world. And so she's eventually has to come to a decision of like, which is more real? Which does she want? Blah, blah, blah. Can she have both? I don't know. Really well written. I really loved the flavor of this steampunk world. It was very, very unique. And I really, really enjoyed that. And I should probably read more of her stuff, but I just haven't because so many books, so little time. So I hope that if you are at all interested or needed to tiptoe into the romance novel for a challenge this year, that this video may have helped you. I hope that this video also maybe I communicated well that the romance genre isn't trash. I think in the publishing world, there may be lower standards as far as writing style, but you can find some really good books that happen to have romance or sex that is uniquely inherent into their plot in the romance section. Like it's possible. You can have a really fun reading experience without feeling like you're just reading glorified porn, is what I'm trying to say. And I've had so much fun. They're such light reads. They make me giggly and feel nice and happy. And I really, really enjoy romance novels, or at least the good ones that I have been able to find. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave me in the comments down below. Let me know, do you read romance? Are you scared of it? Are you prejudiced against it? That's totally fine. I was prejudiced against it too. And do you have any recommendations for me? I would really love to hear anything you have to say. Thank you for watching, and until next time, continue to be lovely.